Are you conscious of your addiction? Refuse to be defined by it? Not satisfied with living your life on the surface? Are you drawn to deeper meaning and purpose? And believe that it's possible to grow through your addiction to experience true freedom? Well, welcome home. Share the journey from addiction to freedom with your host, Michael Gregory.
So welcome again to Addiction to Freedom. Today I've just had a really interesting conversation with Roeland Jaspers. He's a social worker of over 20 years experience and he developed a particular interest in helping young people and in particular young people recovering from addiction. And during our conversation we did talk about what that rehabilitation looks like and what that experience is for people. But we also, in a way, went on a bit of a journey where we ended up realising that we're kind of all in rehab, even though we may not be in a specialised facility, because the process of rehabilitation is really one of learning new skills and learning new skills specifically to create better outcomes and better decisions to problems in our life. So it was really a really interesting conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot. And so I really do encourage you to listen all the way through because that was quite a surprising place to end up. But actually also hearing about the specific rehabilitation process really informed that conversation. So without further ado, I'll just let you enjoy the episode. Well, welcome to another episode of Addiction to Freedom. And today I'm really excited to introduce Roeland Jaspers. He's actually a social worker, has been a social worker for over 20 years, and has worked actually all around the world. And he has particular experience with an interest in young people and helping them overcome addiction and spent 9 years working as a social worker in a drug rehab facility and many other experiences, which I guess we'll get to know. So welcome, Roeland, and thank you so much for putting aside the time to come on the show.
Thanks, Michael. You're welcome.
So I wonder if you could just share a little bit about your background, how you came, to be interested in addiction and rehabilitation.
So I started in Belgium. That's where I'm from originally. And I was a volunteer with disability. So I worked there when I was in my younger years. And then that piqued my interest. And so I went into a social work degree in Belgium. Then I did a couple of years working in institutions in Belgium with young people. So I wanted to more specify specific work with young people, had a lot of energy, and I thought young people are really interesting. And so while I was in these institutions, most of the time between say 8 years old until say 24 years old, that was my specific target group. I worked with them there. And, while you're working with young people, at some point with all these people, you have mental health issues and also drug addictions and so on. And all different addictions. So they correlate and, we have to work through them with the young people because while you're young, it's very, it's a challenging time for most of us, I would presume. So it's a difficult time. And so, you learn a lot of skills and you need to go through. And sometimes the coping mechanisms that we learn when we're young don't always work out, or they're not really, as we say, positively in our society even, they're not really great sometimes. So I think that is, and that's what my background was. And then after a couple of years working like that in Belgium, I wanted to explore the world. And so I went overseas, worked in several countries in America, France, Greece, also Thailand, and then ended up in Australia. So after I met my wife in Thailand, she's American, and then we moved over to Australia because she was already living here. And then I did what I did as a career here too. So I got into working with young people with drug addictions in a specific, like a drug rehab facility. And I did that for more than 9 years. Before that, I did because I was traveling in Australia too, I did some short work jobs around, but like the long one was in the rehab facility. And yeah, I just actually resigned from that position after 9 years because now I am traveling Australia again with my kids.
Oh, fantastic! That's you've got a very long history there of working with people with an addiction, and I'm just wondering, for me and for I guess other people who are not that familiar with what it might be like working in a drug rehabilitation program, can you kind of, give us a bit of a picture of what that's like, how that works?
It's actually a long process. I mean, it goes from the young person having issues, and that could be, maybe not even for his issues. It could be like, hey, my mom thinks I have a problem, or family related, or so someone states at some point, hey, I have a problem, or, you have a problem. So then people try to find a solution for it and, do some research, come at, talk with counselors or people, and they get referred basically to our service, say like a doctor or, a counselor. So they talk with the young person. Is like, well, maybe this is a good program for you. So then they get referred to our service, like rehabs in general. They go normally to an administration process where they ask questions about, well, what is your problem? Like, why do you think you have a problem? What kind of drugs do you use? Are you a smoker? How many times? Because like people have different ideas about what addiction is. Some people can say, well, I use illegal drugs like once a month, and that's my addiction. Okay, fair enough. For other people, it's like, oh, I need to spend like $500 a week, otherwise, So we're asking a lot of questions about what do you think the problem is, and then also more specific, well, how can we help you, and what do you expect from our service? Because that's very important, that you have a kind of an expectations about what is happening. Also, with one of the most important things I find is, okay, who wants you to come to our service? Is it, say, yourself because you think you have the problem, or is it somebody else who thinks there's a problem? I think that is a big and for example, there is nothing wrong with that. I mean, if you want to help yourself because you have a child, and you think like, well, actually, I'm not, the best person towards my child, and I want to give him all the things in life and so on. That could be a very strong motivator to be in our service. I've seen a lot of young people who are there because they want to give their child a better future, for example. So then that is all intake. Yeah, so that means like that can take months before, because it's all about places of availability in the surface. So for example, they make contact in January, and then a couple of months later there is a spot available, and then they come into our service.
And would that be like a live-in arrangement, or is it maybe visiting throughout for appointments during the week?
Okay, so with that, there are different setups in rehab. Most of the time, when we talk about rehab, it is a living situation. Otherwise, you have outpatient help, which is not really. It's more like we support you. You go to the counselor, to the doctor for an hour, or even longer for group therapy and so on, and then you go back home and you live in your own house. That's outpatient thing. However, if you could talk more like about rehab, then we are talking about most of the time 24/7 support. So, and then even then you have two different options. You have first the detox option, where young people who have strong illicit drug use, and they need to withdraw from symptoms, because there are two different sections there. In our service, we had a detox facility, and that was then for the first 10 days, kind of, or even it could be shorter, depending on the needs of the student, where they detox and just withdraw from their drug use. Because in that time, it's very delicate. I mean, you're still on all these medications and on the drugs, and your body does all these weird things, and your mind too at the same time. And so you need to have like a very specific support there. It's like the doctors. It's a holistic program most of the time. I'm talking in general now, because I mean, a lot of rehabs have different structures and different ways of operating. So I'm just giving you kind of an overall view of what it is. So then, so for example, the detox, is that it can also, a detox could have been done in a hospital. There are a lot of detoxes that are part of a hospital, most of the time actually, because they need so much resources. You need to have like doctors all around. You need to have like, sometimes there is violence or more security issues, because people can't handle it, and they say like, well, we need something now, and they can't cope anymore with the problem, and then they act out. Of course, then we need to take care of the safety issues of other students and so on. So there is more like a security part in that too, if you know what I mean. So, and that again, actually one, and then we're talking about money too, is like some hospitals even say like, well, stay at home until you can't handle it anymore. Yes. And that is just because some hospitals have a limited time frame when they can have somebody. Say, well, in our hospital, we can only have you for 4 or 5 days max. That is our time frame that we can help you. Okay. It's about money. Yeah. Like, we only have a limited amount of spots available. So so then you stay at home, do all, whatever you can to detox on your own. And whenever you think like, nah, I can't help it, I need some, targeted support 24/7, then you come into the hospital, and then all the doctors are there, the nurses, and that specific, and also, for example, drug, medication to help you through these difficult times. And then, for example, after that, they stayed on 5 days, for example, in the detox, and then they move on to a long-term rehab. Now, the long-term rehab can be like, say, 3 months, it can be 6 months, it can be a year. So there is some leeway in that, depends on the
And that would
service.
be living in the facility for that long?
Yes. When you're in the facility, it doesn't mean that you, for example, can't get out. But like, for example, in the facility I worked, the first month you stayed on the ground, on the premises. However, other people could come and visit you over the weekend. And then that, like the first weekend, there was no visitation, but then afterwards, when everything goes okay, you can have your support system coming in, because that's also important, that on the questions on the intake, for example, will be like, hey, which support network do you have? Who is important to you? Are they there? Are they behind you? Or who is it that you don't want to be involved in your recovery, and so on. So these support people, we're going to have chats with them and see that they're a positive part of that, and we don't want to have any violence or something in our on our premises, for example. And then they can come over and support the young person in their recovery. So after the first month, then they can go and do, like, for example, outside visitations. So, for example, they can go on weekend leave. And that is, I think, also important, because we teach the whole idea about the long-term part is that we teach them new skills, new coping mechanisms, new understanding about their own issues, why other people are reacting to them, and so on. So we teach them all these things. Now, when you go on weekend, you come back into the stressors of your environment because it's a little bit of an artificial space. Yeah, we were you had like one house where I worked, and we had 6 people in there. Now, of course, that's a dynamic, and they all have their own issues. So they're working through that. But then when they go back to their own family situation, where, for example, parents can use, that's possible. Yeah, so they learn all these skills, and then they go back into that environment, and that's very difficult. Yeah, because it triggers them basically. It's like, you have all these things happening. And so then actually what we tell them, like what you see is they can use all these things that they learned in that environment. And a lot of times they will fail, for example, or they fail as in they're relapsed. Yeah. And because I actually don't think it as a failure. Sometimes the students will see it as a failure. Yeah, but it's not. It's actually the word I just used is actually not a very positive word, because you see, like, well, it's you totally, like, I didn't learn anything, or it didn't work, or whatever. Now, these things take time, and because you need to re-educate yourself and see, like, oh, well, maybe that time it didn't work, and then you come back to our service and you say, like, well, why was it that thing, what you did, what we taught you, why was it that it didn't work? And then you go through all these things with the counselors and so on, talking about, like, well, my dad was using, and I just saw it was on the table, and, well, it happened. So, okay. And then you go through all the strategies about, what can you do the next time, and so on. And so basically it's like making young people stronger and stronger again. For example, like, okay, it was on the table. Well, what could you have done differently? So you wouldn't have, oh, well, I could have gone for a walk, or I could have, asked my parents to put it away, because they're very supportive, but, they didn't think about it, and so on. So, all these different ways.
Can I ask something perhaps I should have asked before? Do you think that somebody has to get, there's this saying where you need to hit rock bottom before you're ready to change? Do you subscribe to that? Do you think that's true, or is it different for different people?
No, I don't think so. They sometimes in the media they say, like, you need to get rock bottom. I don't believe so. People have different. Some people, that is where they end up. But I mean, it's not necessarily so. Some people can see, we're all individuals, different backgrounds and so on. Some people can already see that something is happening with them way before they're there. And then they come to our service or other services, and I know there is a problem. I just don't know how to rectify it or change things. But on the other hand, also, you have people who come in our service like 3-4 times. So they come in, they learn quite a bit of stuff, and then they say, like, oh, I think I'm ready. And then a year later, they come back and they're like, yeah, and because it's a growing process. For example, and especially I'm talking now with young people, like, a 16-year-old has a very different kind of understanding about things than an 18 or 20-year-old. So at 16, for example, he wasn't ready. Yeah, he learned a lot of stuff. For him, he thought he was, it was okay, but then a year later, it spiraled out of control again, for example, and he had to come back. And sometimes they know, like, oh, yeah, I had to come back. And I think over that time, a lot of things can change. I mean, we can talk about that later too, but I mean, we have to figure out what the client wants, because it's all about motivation. If we have young people who say like, oh, I want abstinence, or I don't, I want I want harm minimization, as in harm minimization as like reducing of the harm inflicted on you. Well, there are two different choices. So, and I think, and that is also then depends on which rehab you're going to. Some rehabs say like, nah, harm minimization, we don't do that. We just do abstinence. And if you don't like it, well, then you need to go to a different rehab, which is, that's the rehab's decision and how they work. But it depends on choices. So for us, it was a voluntary program, so which is also important, I think, because then you're like, well, you want to be here. If you don't want to be here, well, then you can always go. We don't force you to be there. Yeah. Of course, there are situations where young people, when they are harmed for themselves or to others, they need to be in hospital, and that's a different situation. Okay, but in our rehab, that wasn't the case.
Yeah. So what type of skills, is there a kind of a set formula or program that you take people through? Can you give us a bit of an insight into, is there like a foundational understanding and then there's modification of that, or what kind of skills do you help people learn?
So we work in a holistic, and most organizations I worked with are a holistic kind of program, and I think that's the right one. If you focus on one thing, just drugs or anything else, you don't always attack the problem in itself. Like lives are complex, families are complex, you have finances, all these things have an impact. For example, if you're going to go and, you say like, oh, all these emotional regulation and we're going to help you with your help, but then your finances are, not there. And, you need to you have to revert back to criminal activities and so on. You're, that's not helping the person, because he's going to go back and, probably worse off before. So with the program, we'll teach them skill workshops, for example, like, woodwork or metal work, or driving forklifts, or admin, or, you name it. All these, most of the time, basic foundational courses that can help with employment, for example.
Right. So that addresses the finances if they can get employment.
Yeah, but also, for example, financial counseling about how to, say if you're on Centrelink, okay, well, how can you get like your money, and what are your outgoings, what are your incomings, and so on, so you can actually take care of yourself financially. And then, of course, another option, like another thing is like emotional regulation is like, okay, why are we acting out? Why are we being upset? Oh, well, because my whoever my neglected me, and that triggered me, and so then that really, I couldn't handle that, and I punched the wall. Yeah. Well, okay, was that a good outcome? No, because I broke my hand. Okay, so then you got in hospital, all right, and you move on. Okay, so then you go back, like, okay, where did you feel it in your body? What happened? And that are these counselors, where you work through all these emotions and trying to fix. Or like not fix, actually, trying to understand where that comes from, and what is the problem, and try to put like a breaker in there, so you can say like, okay, before you hit the wall, we're putting this in place. Like, for example, some of the things that young people liked was music, so they get upset, and then you say like, oh, and sometimes that's worker's job, just like, hey, I can see you're upset. What about you spoke to me before that music calmed you down? Why don't you go and listen to some music? And that is the process I'm talking about. It's like, in the beginning, we will have to help them with that and say like, hey, you told me music is a good, relaxes you. And then after a while, they figure it out themselves. And they say like, oh, I feel upset. Wait, I'm going to my room, listen to some music. And after half an hour, they come back and are like, yeah, I'm okay again.
Yeah. So you're obviously helping develop kind of alternative strategies. But I'm really interested in what you said there before. You said fix, and then you corrected yourself and said not fix. So can you unpack that a little bit for us? Just what's the difference between a fixing approach and the other approach that you mentioned?
Well, yeah, I guess with fixing, I mean, you go with the idea that something is broken, and I guess that is I don't think that's true. Like on the other hand, I like to make it pretty clear instead of making it very convoluted and thinking about we need to be careful with our words. On the other hand, it's indeed like a good mention here that we're all people with all problems and so on. And inherently, there is nothing wrong with the person in itself. It's about how they learned maybe like negative ways of dealing with things and that is a societal thing, yeah, like not every society has the same restraints, for example, or cultural beliefs and so on. So but in our Western Australia, Western society, it's more like, okay, well, medically, like, we were like, oh, we want to fix him, give him some medication, and he's up and running again. On the other hand, if you work more holistically, then you can see like, okay, the coping mechanisms that they learned from like before that weren't helpful, yeah, we can adapt them so they actually are more helpful for the person himself and for the others around him. Yeah.
Right. So that sounds more like that there's an inherent acceptance of the person as they are, and then their behaviours are looked at in a wider context as not that there's something wrong with them, but those behaviours are really just a reflection of an attempted solution to a situation. And happens that solution is not serving them in the best possible way. Is that
exactly
more along the lines?
I think they're learned. A lot of behaviors are learned. So if you see at home all the time that one of your family members is getting really upset and start punching walls, yeah, imagine you're a 4-year-old and whoever is punching walls all the time, every time you say the wrong thing, well, that's accepted. Like, that's normal stuff. I mean, like, you wouldn't really blink an eye for that because that's normal. It's normal. Like, so next time I'm getting, I'm the 4-year-old, I'm becoming older, and at 8, I'm starting to have a tantrum. I'm starting hitting walls because that is what other people do. I see that, and it's a learned behavior. So then, of course, if you're 4 years old, you're not too strong, you're not going to punch through the wall. However, if you're then 25-year-old who is like massive, does whatever, kickboxing and some martial arts and so on, if he hits the wall or, then you're going to have some damage. So, there are these learned behaviors that aren't always helpful in our society. And I guess that's also the part where you think about the law. With addictions, it's the law that comes in play too. Because what is the difference between smoking and illicit drugs? Well, one is accepted. You can use that, like the police officers are not going to put you in jail for that. For the other one, they are. So, I mean, it is, you have that context where you live in. And then even in context, like if you go to the Middle East and you do the shisha pipes there and so on, it's a cultural experience. Well, if, to be part of that culture it is actually a good thing to do that. Where here, well, and actually in Australia, times have changed. If you look back, a couple of decades, the same as in Europe, smoking was kind of okay. We didn't know. Oh yeah, there were all ads and whatever. But now people know, it's not good for your health. It costs the system a lot of money. So as a society, it's actually better that we try to get everybody stopping with smoking, because that's better for financially and for the health of all our citizens.
So in terms of behaviours as an attempted solution, and we talked about like the behaviour of acting out, like punching the wall or some other kind of behaviour, but what about the behaviour of taking drugs? What's your view on that? Why is that something that someone's doing to solve another problem in their life, or what's your experience with that?
I think with drugs and addictions and so on, there is most of the time an underlying factor why people are doing that, and it could be something small like stress at work, for example. You just need to, people think like, oh, I need to have like that glass of wine at the end of the day to relax. And, so in our society, we have a lot of stressors. You go to work, people you work with, maybe sometimes you don't like what somebody said or whatever, or they did the wrong thing, or somebody criticizes you. And it's that your own personality is thrown into that mix. So it also depends on your own personality. If you are in some people thrive in certain situations and other ones are not. And I guess that is why we need to talk to people. What is it that they want? Because, like, for example, and it's about freedom then, what we're talking about. It's like, say, a CEO goes to work and he really has that personality and he thrives on challenges and he really loves it. Yeah. His work and trying to fix things and, well, that could be for that CEO freedom. He has what he wants in that particular field. Yes. Yeah. And then that's freedom. He has what he wants. That is what he wants to achieve in life. On the other hand, if he something else, yeah, in the family, well, it could be like a total mess there, yeah, like he gets a divorce or whatever, and so on, and that is the stressor, yeah. Now another CEO has maybe the other way around. He's like, oh, my family is important, blah blah blah, a good relationship. And then at work, he struggles because he, doesn't have the skills maybe, or the, strategies. And if he finds that very stressful. So, we are talking about individuals here who have, maybe the same job, put them in the same family, but they have different experiences with different problems. And then these problems trigger abuse or addiction abuse. If you understand what I'm trying to say here.
So what you're saying is that the stresses in life are the drug. The drug experience is a solution to the stresses and other suffering in life.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's kind of your experience? I have talked to other people I've talked to other people who have basically said the same thing, that their life was just so dark that the drug experience was kind of a relief from that, give them a break from that, which in a way backs up, I think, what you're saying.
Yeah. I heard so many young people saying like, "Oh, I just wanted to escape from," and that could be from anything, escape from financial issues, family, from friends, domestic violence, all these different things, and all these things need to be unpacked in a process to try to find out, okay, how can we help this person, this individual, with their addiction? And because like most of the time, some people, they have these issues, yeah, and they drink it at night and nobody knows, yeah. They're functional addicts and functional in society, and maybe one colleague will say like, oh, he did a little bit weird, but apart from that, fine, on the surface. But then when we talk with that person about, okay, how is your life going? Then we have some, it's like, oh, I feel insecure, I have issues, I can't cope with that, and that's why I do these things. And I think I like Carl Rogers in British humanistic psychology, as in, okay, you need to be congruent with with who you want to be and what you actually do. So you have an idea in your mind about who you want to be. I want to be a loving dad. Yeah. And at some point I had that in my own experience. Okay. So I always thought that I was a loving dad. Yeah. And at some point I saw myself completely, yelling at my son for whatever he did. Maybe he put the popcorn in the wrong bowl, or I don't know what it was. And so, you have the ideal that I wanted to be, like a loving dad, and then my yelling at my son, as in, well, categorized as not really loving towards my son. So then you start asking yourself questions like, well, that is not congruent with the two different, they are not aligned. The two things are not aligned. So, and I think that's a lot with addictions in general too, is like you have this idea about who you want to be or who you are and so on, and then the actions that you do, and then they are totally not aligned or really far away from each other, and that gives stress, and that stress then gives like guilt and so on, and then you think like, well, let's go and drink some bottles of wine, and then you don't have to think about it, so then the problem is gone for a while. However, could be that in a couple of months, a couple of days, you do the same thing again. That's a pattern then.
Yeah. Sounds like, in a way, the rehabilitation process, if we call it that, is one of actually helping somebody understand their life and themselves, and to make choices and how to deal with situations in a more harmonious or congruent way. Would that be right?
Yeah, exactly, and also more in a society accepted way. So we need to. If other people just drink like one glass, like a couple of glasses a night at home where nobody sees it, well, yeah, it's not good for the person, because they're still having the same addiction and so on. But in society, I guess it's more accepted than somebody who punches somebody else in the face. So I think we all need some help, and that's why I think with psychologists and so on, I think everybody could be helped in that way. Everybody has some problems in their lives, and just talking about it, and and I guess with that is some people don't have people to talk about, where we have friends or family or so on, and that is that's already sometimes what people just need, is like having a chat, and like, but other people need a little bit more specific help when it's out of control.
Yeah. Well, talking about kind of socially accepted behaviours and things like that, for example, you're saying that there are some addictions that are socially accepted and others that are not, and some that are looked down upon as really negative, for example, illicit drugs, and others that perhaps fly completely under the radar, like, let's call it, addiction to sugar or something like that. And that's kind of my view too, is that we're all addicted in ways, whether it be more obvious or more subtle, and those addictions are, in a way, an attempted solution to whatever we're dealing with at the time. It sounds like the way that the philosophy and the way that you help people in terms of rehabilitation, really we could all learn from that.
Yeah, I think, but on the other hand, like, we try to help other people's, but on the other hand, sometimes I need to help myself too, because I'm not in trouble with the law, for example, but I have my own struggles too. Like I'm addicted to food, and so when I have a lot of knowledge about addictions and so on, however, I had to put it towards myself and take a mirror and see like, okay, what can I do? And what I find is there are two strong slogans that I like to use, like step by step working towards a goal. That's one, because sometimes I think people want to go too quick with changing. You need to do step by step, and small successes is the key. You go step by step with like a little bit of a success, and then you build on that and you move forward that way. And then with, for example, my food addiction is like, you need to do what works for you, because like we are individuals. What I do wouldn't always help others. And so that listening to your clients is very important to figure out what it is. So for example, in my case, with my food addiction.
So what's your food addiction?
So I eat a lot of chocolates.
Well, tell us if you.
So I always.
I think you're probably not alone there.
Yeah. So with the thing was, I was very active and very energetic, and so I always thought I could eat whatever I wanted. With when I do a lot of sport, yeah, because you burn a lot of calories. Well, you can do whatever you want. However, when you get older, that's not the case. And then I had to learn how to reduce that. And after a while, you kind of find yourself in the pantry, not because I was hungry, but because I was bored and or I didn't know what to do, or I had I was emotionally upset about something, and I found myself in the cupboard. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. However, it's not, it's society, people with 150 kilos and so on, so I didn't want to get into that statistic and so on. So basically, what I had to figure out how to change that and to try to something that works for me. And for me, I'm not related to any of these programs and the soup, the cabbage soup and whatever. I don't really do these things. For me, what worked was the intermittent fasting, for example, which was like, okay, I do this program and I fast for a while, and then I can eat between a specific time, and then at a certain time I can eat again. And there's a lot of scientific research behind it. However, that system, my addiction for that worked for me. And that's what I'm trying to say here too, is like, for, people have, like, say somebody else, I spoke to a lot of people about this kind of plan, and they said, like, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that, and obviously that wouldn't help that person. Another person, same struggles as what I had, for example, they need to find something else that works, and that's fine. That's completely fine. But it worked for me, and that is the key. Where with, in rehab and so on, we don't always know what is in the beginning what works for somebody. It's only after a long process that you figure out this works for, Bob, and then that works for Jane, and so on.
Right. So basically, it's a kind of a bit of exploration with yourself, let's say, in terms of trying to understand what's going on, and then trying, based on that understanding, different solutions till you find something that does work.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And I think a lot of research helps us a lot. Now we have we have the internet, we have all these research out there that can guide us in our lives about okay, you don't need to do like in the past, several hundred years ago, everybody had to do all these things on their own to find out what worked. Well, now you have research and 30 different ways on how to do things. And then you can read up on things and then explore it and see if that works for you. So we already have a really good resource in these research things and that is, of course, with while you're struggling in your home with stressors that are minor. Because obviously, if a person, it's too much, the stressors are too many, then you need professional help. And that is fine, because it's better to have some professional help for say a couple of months, and then you pick up your game again, and you find a way how to deal with these things, yeah, with your specific triggers, and then you can move forward. Yeah, then having not that help, and then you waste a lot of time basically. Otherwise, if you.
It really sounds to me like it's kind of a process of becoming more aware of yourself and, in a way, wiser in your choices, and based on understanding of what's going to work and what's a good way to handle something, and what's not. It really is sounding to me like its development of wisdom leads to a less stressful life, a more peaceful life, happier life. I mean, I'm just projecting forward the extension of our conversation.
Yeah, it's true. I think what I find, like, one of the things that is very difficult for some young people, especially young people, is like in general, to like a lot of people that I met with who are in rehab. They have a black and white kind of thinking sometimes, and they say like, oh, they're doing great for the society wise. They're everything goes okay, 3 weeks and blah blah blah, and then one little thing goes wrong. Yeah, they're yelling at somebody or something like that. And then they're so harsh on themselves. They're like, and it's like, oh, I'm the worst person. I'm the thingy, da 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 da, and then they go off the rails again, and because and it's that thing like, you don't have to be 100%. You can be that. We in our society, I think too, is like we always want to pretend that we're like top notch and heroes and so on, and we are not designed for that. Like, people make mistakes. We make a lot of mistakes, and we learn from them. And I think it's the key is to learn from our mistakes and move forward. And that black and white thinking, like, okay, I want to do 100%. If I have 90, that's really bad. However, that kid that says like, I want to have 80, suddenly gets 90, well, percent on his exam, he's going through the roof. He's like, woohoo, this is great. So I think we need to be more kind to ourselves in several ways and so on, and ask also for help. Like, if you can't deal with things, it would be good to have somebody there to support you in your time of need.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a much more kinder way of viewing yourself, to give yourself some more space and, in a way, grace for behaving in ways that are unexpected, and then working out whether that was good or not, and then modifying, and not expecting that the journey isn't one of ups and downs.
Yes.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking with you, particularly, and I'm kind of surprised how I thought we were going to be. In my head, I had rehabilitation and detox facilities. I had them in my head kind of segregated into a very special category, but now what I'm seeing is that they're actually a facility to learn life skills and to gain more self-knowledge, and to get support to find different strategies that are going to produce a happier life, which is, in a way, maybe some more concentrated support system. But I kind of think that we're all in that rehab process, if you know what I mean. Like, we're all trying to find ways that are smoother and less causing of suffering in our life. I mean, you see that in everyone, in a way. Everyone's trying to find better ways of being that creates more happiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like getting rid of barriers, and whatever barriers you have, if it's an educational one, well, learn a new skill. Learn forklift driving. Okay, that will help with your finances. That barrier is gone then. So if it's like family, well, maybe you need to learn skills about communication.
Well, I think, Roland, I think we probably should bring things to a close. I'm just mindful of the time. But I really appreciate you taking the time out to share your experience. I think it's really, you've given us a really good insight into the world of rehabilitation, and also thank you for sharing about your own addictions and how you're approaching those, because I think that's what we can all learn from that.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, it was.
So I've really enjoyed our interview.
You're welcome. And yeah, like, I'm still working on myself every day, So, but it's trying to get all these little knowledge and so on compact in there, and to make your life better. Every day, you should try to make your life a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, I am too. So, all right. Well, thanks so much. And it's been really great to meet you.
Thanks, Michael. It was a pleasure.